Next, we have John Smith.
I'm an atheist.
Okay.
Strong
or weak?
I'd actually go with strong on
Okay.
it, for a few kind of specific reasons.
Before you ask your question, I just want to say thanks for answering directly. I talked to some atheists. What do you want to know? What's the problem? That's my question. It's like, oh, I just appreciate you just saying, hey, that's where I'm at. Okay, thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't like dodging questions either. It's a frustrating thing when people do that.
Yeah. So what's your question or comment or whatever?
Well, I guess there's sort of two things that I'm interested in. You can maybe pick which either one is more interesting to you. There's so the idea of presuppositions that can work as blinders.
Yes.
There's something about the way people think that can set up blinders on them.
Yes.
And if you say that other people have blinders, then how can you be sure that you don't also have blinders?
Good question.
Or the other one would be, it's actually still unclear to me exactly what you might mean by objective morality. So, I don't know, whichever one is more interesting. Well, maybe the morality thing's been done to death.
I love that one though, but don't worry about it. Whatever you want to talk about. We can talk about both of them. Just pick one to go first.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, let's say the presupposition thing first.
Okay. Everybody has presuppositions. You as an atheist and I as a Christian. So you have the position not God. I have the position God. Both of our positions cannot be true because they're mutually exclusive. Are you with me so far?
I understand what you're saying. I mean, I don't agree, but
well,
I understand.
This is a point of logic. For example, I don't know if you can see this. This is a cup. I have a little iced tea in here. So I'm going to say, hold on, a cough. Hold on a sec. Mute myself. Whoops. Okay. So if I were to say this is a cup, it is also the case that it is not a cup. Would I be offering something that's self-contradictory?
You mean if it's a cup and you say it's not a cup, is that self-contradictory?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
And can both those statements be true in the same sense in the same way?
No.
So if I were to say to you, I believe in a worldview where my cup that exists is also not a cup that exists, then I have a problem, right? So if something is self-contradictory, it cannot be true.
Right.
And we only have two views. This is a cup. It is not a cup. Either one is true, but not both. Right?
Sure. I get what you're saying.
Okay. So we either have God is or God is not. It cannot be that both are true. God either exists or God does not exist, right?
Sure.
So either one must be true.
Sure.
Okay. It's called a disjunctive syllogism. When we only have two options and one of them is negated, the other one is validated by default. So for example, if we have a phenomena, a pair of tweezers, and this tweezers has a special power. And the Christian position, because I'm only going to argue for the Christian position, see a pair of tweezers, really good tweezers too, because splinters out with these things are great, they're awesome. So, and this is not the best example, I just reached for something on my desk. If there's a certain characteristic about this, and I said, it exists because God exists, or it exists because God does not exist, then whatever the explanation is, cannot be true for both situations because both statements exclude the others being possible.
Sure. So, I think my disagreement is a little bit different. Without suggesting that the idea of whether or not God exists is something that's really important, I don't think that like there's this sort of presuppositional model where we've all got our presuppositions, right, that are sort of like axioms, like the ground floor ideas that we build everything else on, right? That's sort of what a presupposition is. Right.
Generally, presuppositions are assumptions that you can't validate. Generally.
Sure. So I guess my disagreement is that there are is a human thought doesn't actually work that way. I don't think it begins out of basics, the most basic statements that you can point at and say, here are my presuppositions. I think things are a little vaguer than that.
Not necessarily. In some areas, yes. In some areas, no. You have a set of presuppositions as someone who openly denies God exists. You're, as a strong atheist, you're saying you know or you believe and you assert that God does not exist. You're a strong atheist. And I'm saying, no, I'm a strong theist, a strong Christian. So we both cannot be correct. Right?
For sure, yeah.
If one of us is proven to be false, then the other one is automatically correct. You don't have to prove the other one correct. It's true by definition, true by default. You with me?
So imagine we're having this discussion, and at the end of it, you've defeated all of my arguments for atheism. So let's imagine that just happened.
But that would not prove atheism false. It just means I've disproven all of your arguments.
Okay. So what is the difference between that, disproving all of my arguments, and proving atheism false?
Well, if I could show that the arguments fall into various categories, and all the categories can't explain, then I have defeated atheism. And or if a theistic position can give something an atheist position cannot, then I've demonstrated it. Or if I can show that an atheistic position is self-refuting due to its atheism, then the atheism could not be true. Notice I'm setting you up step by step.
Right.
I want you to agree that if something is self-refuting, it can't be true.
And yeah, this I would agree with. But I mean, again, the difference between showing that what I've said is self-refuting and the difference between the idea that God does not exist is self-refuting.
Well, you can't prove that God does not exist.
Well, I would say that certain specific properties of God can be proven to not exist. Certain specific properties.
Give me one property of the Christian God that can be proven not to exist.
Necessity.
I don't understand what you mean by necessity.
Could not exist. Or could not exist in a different...
Because what you're talking about with necessity of the Christian God, you're talking about an internal characteristic. How do you analyze his internal characteristic when he's completely different than what we are, and then prove that he can't have it?
Well, I mean, it's the ontological argument, right? The ontological
argument. But if you're going to talk about proof, you're presupposing the validity of logic.
All right. Well, okay. So you don't use the ontological argument, but that, as far as I'm aware, that is the only argument that tries to show that it is logically impossible for God to not exist.
Well, I wouldn't say that that is the case, but I don't use the ontological argument.
And I know you don't. But is there a different way of proving that the statement "God does not exist" is internally contradictory? Like I know you would say that I'm an atheist.
Sure.
I think God doesn't exist. Therefore, I'm going to be inconsistent about morality. I'll be inconsistent about science, etc., etc. But what I'm curious about is the statement "God does not exist" itself self-contradictory.
Okay. Yes, let me work with you. The statement "God does not exist," let me ask you, is it a true statement or is it not the case that it's a true statement? How do you know it's true?
Oh, God does not exist? So
Yeah.
it's specifically the property of necessary God, the property of necessity is not
I
is
didn't
what I
know,
mean.
but I've already shown you that you don't understand the character and nature of God to be able to establish that necessity is something that's a problem. And you base it on the ontological argument, which I don't use. But I ask you a specific question. How do you know the statement, there is no God, is a true statement that properly comports with actuality?
Okay, so just to clarify here, you asked me if I was a strong atheist. The reason I said yes to strong atheism is because I don't believe there is a necessary being.
Okay, let's get past the necessary. This is the third time I'm going to say this to you. You don't know the nature of a being who is completely other than what you are, so as to understand the issue of necessity in his characteristic, in his ontos, in his nature, so that you can then say there is no such requirement of necessity.
So if there's
and you're being self-contradictory.
It sounds like you're saying that necessity is something mysterious.
Is it necessary? Is it necessary? Okay. How do you know there's no necessity with God?
Because the statement God could be different, like completely different from what you think he is, or is hypothetically exists. God could be completely different, is not internally.
How do you know that?
Because the ontological argument fails.
Because what?
Because the ontological argument fails.
Okay, I don't use the ontological argument.
Sure. Well,
okay.
That's what I think, right? You asked me a question, and that's my answer to the question.
But I don't use the ontological argument. And we should have a common ground instead of an uncommon one. And you can say necessity. I'm asking you how you know there's no necessity in God's existence, because if he exists, then there's necessity by definition.
So if he exists, there's necessity by definition?
In his being.
So I actually don't know how you would establish that without the ontological argument. Like, how would you?
If he has existence, and if he is what he is from forever, then by definition he has necessity. Otherwise he wouldn't exist. To say that he would be God, but he can't because he can't have necessity, is to say God can't be God. That's why he can't be God. It doesn't make any sense. If God exists, then he has necessity.